There are very few things that everyone on the internet will agree upon, but one of those things is that cloaks are awesome and we need more of them in everyday life. So today I give you my contribution to that philosophy. A timeless cloak, warm enough for winter walks through the snow, yet still practical for a busy modern life. I'd originally intended this project to be the Winterberry cloak pattern from Mood, but quickly discovered that while the 3 yards of gorgeous coating wool I had would fit most cloak patterns, Mood's pattern is extremely voluminous, and they are not joking when they say you need 5 yards for a full-length cloak. This meant I was about 2 yards short. Since this fabric was one of the more expensive yardages I've bought, after wrestling with options, I decided to look for another pattern with a similar drape and found a free downloadable one that worked quite well. Link is in the description if anyone wants to give it a try. I did a quick mock-up to check the fit before cutting into the good fabric, and once satisfied, got to work. This fabric is quite heavy, so I basted it together rather than relying entirely on pins. In principle, this is a super easy project, with just 2 straight seams for the outer fabric and 2 for the lining. Pressing seams is always important, even if, nay, especially if, it's a heavyweight fabric like coating wool. And when I got to the shoulders, I pressed over a tailor's ham to help set the curve in place. Once the seams were pressed, for some reason I pinned the hem of the outer fabric down, but did not actually stitch it down at this point. Don't ask me why, I procrastinated so much on this project, some of the stages are quite a blur. In fact, I started this almost a year ago. I got to this stage in construction, hit a mental roadblock when it came to the collar situation, and ended up stuffing it into a bag with my other UFOs, as it was at that point moving time. New house, new space, new shiny projects to sew that didn't give me a headache when I thought about them, and let's face it, who wants to think about making winter projects in late spring? But I finally said enough was enough, time to tackle it once more. The collar was a bear to figure out, and I ended up giving up on ready-made pattern pieces and drafting my own, with a little dash of winging it. Is the shape of the pattern one that's commonly used? Maybe not. Did it give the end result I wanted? Yes, it did. I cut 2 pieces of my collar, and one got pinned to the right side of the cloak. I sewed it on by hand using running back stitches, which is a running stitch with a back stitch every few stitches for added security. I graded the seam allowance, only cutting down one side to reduce bulk at the neck. Then I added the second collar piece and stitched it first along the top and side edges, then the bottom edge. Because this is such a heavyweight wool, I didn't want to turn my edges in, as that would have made the collar really bulky and awkward, so I decided to bind the edges instead. I used the same fabric as my lining, cut in straight grain strips. The right side is sewn down by machine, and then turned under and felled down by hand. Then I could add the lining, and I made sure to cover all the raw edges of the collar with the satin. I had already turned the raw edge of the facings under, so then I tucked the lining underneath and pinned the facing in place. Then I got around to the outer hem, and I made sure that the stitches that showed on the outside were as small as possible. I took a break to sew down the lining to the collar edge using silk thread, securing it with whip stitches. I wanted this to be as practical a cloak as possible, and one complaint I've seen online is that if you're all bundled up, you have to unbundle to reach outside and grab anything. This can be solved with arm slits. While not a common historical technique, I have seen a couple variations of historical cloaks with them, and you can definitely see them as options in a lot of modern designs. I mean, what's the point in wearing a cloak if you can't be cozy and sip hot chocolate at the same time? Am I right? And this was undeniably nerve-wracking, and I once again procrastinated way too long on this. I knew it was simple. I knew I could do it, but I was about to cut into the middle front of my cloak in a very visible place. And if I messed up, it would be obvious and there'd be nothing I could do about it. But I finally said, screw it, I'm gonna do it, then it's done. The first step was marking out how far down and out from the front edge I wanted the cuts to be. This took a few fittings before I was happy with the placement. For a super precise cut, I used my rotary cutter, and it turned out so nice and crisp. I treated the arm slits like a welt edge, so I made 2 tiny diagonal cuts at the end of each slit. Then I turned in and pinned the outer fabric, before doing the same for the lining. I used a beautiful silk thread and top-stitched everything down by hand, very close to the edge. And to help keep the upper and lower edges secure and prevent wear, I did a blanket hole, buttonhole-ish stitch across each end. I also top-stitched along the center front edges to hold everything nicely in place and give a crisp finish. And the facing was whip-stitched to the lining fabric, taking care not to catch the outer fabric. I decided to go with a couture classic style of coat finishing for the hems, leaving both the outer and lining fabric loose instead of sewing them to each other. The hem of the lining fabric got turned under once, and then I used tiny herringbone stitches to hold it in place. At last, it was time to add the closure, a simple but elegant hook and eye clasp I got from Joann Fabrics. And at long, long last, it's complete. It's over, Sam. It's done. It did not need to take as long as it did. But when my brain gets hung up on something, my motivation takes a long walk, and it takes a whole lot of effort to rein it back in. But I am quite happy with how this cloak turned out. It is very cozy and very comfy, and I have no doubt it will keep me warm through the winter. I kind of wish the arm slits were slightly narrower width, but with the fabric I was working with, there really wasn't another option. And looking at the instructions on the Winterberry cape, mine are actually quite low-key in comparison, and they are very practical. I can carry things and still keep the rest of me warm and toasty, as opposed to other cloaks where the front and side of you ends up cold if you're carrying a bag or a coffee or anything really. And if you don't procrastinate like I did, this is a super easy project to make. You can use pretty much any kind of fabric you want and it will turn out awesome. The online pattern also has a hood option. I obviously didn't include one on mine. I wanted this cloak to feel more sleek and couture rather than fantasy. But I am kind of kicking around the idea of making a detachable hood with some of the leftover fabric. Let me know in the comments if you think that idea would be good or weird, because I honestly don't know. So I encourage you to go forth and live your own cloak-adorned life. They really are awesome to wear. If you enjoyed this video, please hit like and subscribe. If you want to support the channel, I have a Ko-fi page, and I will see you all soon with more geekery meets history sewing adventures. I'm hoping to have one more video out at the end of the month, and it's gonna be epic, so stay tuned. This coating wool, Well, obviously I have my full cup of coffee.